The United States has more than 6,000 hospitals, most of them are still running. But scattered across the country, from islands off New York to hilltops in Appalachia, there are hospitals that stopped running decades ago and never reopened. A 22-building complex on Ellis Island where the Coast Guard walked out in 1954 without closing the windows, and everything is still inside. A Gothic asylum built on the same hill where a Salem witch trial judge once lived, which H.P. Lovecraft turned into one of horror fiction's most iconic settings. And our number one spot is a place most New Yorkers have never heard of, a 20-acre island in the East River where Typhoid Mary was imprisoned for 23 years and over 1,000 people. Burned alive in the city's deadliest disaster until September 11th. Make sure you stick around for that one. If you love deep dives into forgotten American places, hit subscribe, because we cover stories like this every week. Today we are counting down 12 abandoned hospitals across America you are not allowed to enter. Let's go. Number 12. Linda Vista Community Hospital. Hollywood's favorite corpse. In 1905, the Santa Fe Railroad opened a hospital for its workers in East Los Angeles. It had 150 beds, its own Jersey cows, its own chickens, and a garden to feed patients fresh food daily. By the 1970s, the railroad was gone, the Boyle Heights neighborhood had changed, and the hospital was drowning in gunshot victims it could not afford to treat. It closed in 1991. Nobody cleaned up. Patient records were left open on countertops. Beds sat askew, some made, some not. Decades-old light bulbs still hung from their fixtures. The whole building was frozen mid-shift. Hollywood noticed. The pilot of ER was filmed in the basement. Then Pearl Harbor, LA Confidential, Insidious, Outbreak, Buffy the Vampire Slayer. 9 Inch Nails shot the video for Closer there. Over 60 productions used Linda Vista as a set. In 2015, it was converted into a senior living facility. The horror movies moved out. The residents moved in. Some of them say they still hear things at night. Number 11. Medfield State Hospital. Shutter Island was real. When Martin Scorsese needed a setting for Shutter Island, he did not build one. He filmed at Medfield State Hospital in Massachusetts, a real abandoned psychiatric facility with over 35 decaying buildings spread across 1.4 square miles. It opened in 1896 under the name Medfield Insane Asylum for the chronic insane. It was designed on the cottage plan, meaning dozens of small buildings instead of one massive fortress, built on the theory that patients would heal faster in a place that looked like a college campus. At its peak in the 1940s, it held 2,300 people. New medications in the 1960s began emptying the wards. Fewer than 200 patients remained when it closed in 2003. Today, the grounds are open to the public during daylight hours. You can walk among the buildings. You cannot go inside any of them. Police patrol the site, but what sticks with you is the cemetery. 841 graves, originally marked only with numbers. No names. A local Boy Scout tracked down every single identity as his Eagle Scout project. He gave names back to people who had been reduced to digits. Number 10. Greystone Park Psychiatric Hospital. The building that ate the Pentagon's record. From 1876 to 1943, Greystone Park in Morris Plains, New Jersey was the single largest building in the United States. 673,700 square feet. Bigger than the Pentagon until the Pentagon was built. It was designed by architect Samuel Sloan for a maximum of 1,600 patients. By 1953, it held 7,674. The overcrowding turned a flagship institution into something the press described as looking and smelling like a hog pen. Returning WE soldiers with shell shock were given insulin shock therapy and electroconvulsive treatment in the wards. But Greystone also held a quieter tragedy. In 1961, a young Bob Dylan traveled from Minnesota to the asylum to visit his idol, Woody Guthrie. Guthrie was dying of Huntington's disease in Greystone's wards. That visit would shape Dylan's early career and, by extension, American music. Despite decades of preservationist opposition, the original Kirkbride building was demolished in 2015. A modern psychiatric facility now operates on part of the grounds. The building that once dwarfed the Pentagon is just a parking lot and a memory. Number 9. Henryton State Hospital. The hospital they had to destroy. In 1920s Maryland, African Americans were dying of tuberculosis at 4 times the rate of whites. Existing sanatoriums were whites only. Henryton Tuberculosis Sanatorium opened in 1922 along the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad line as one of the first facilities in the state to provide black patients the same fresh air treatment white patients received. In 1938, the sanatorium expanded with $270,000 in funding to add 200 more beds and a refrigerated mortuary. When tuberculosis declined, the facility became Henryton State Hospital, treating adults with disabilities until it closed in 1985 with fewer than 100 patients left. That should have been the end of the story. It was not. After closure, Henryton became a magnet for urban explorers, squatters, and arsonists. In 2007, someone deliberately set fire to the hospital's theater, its most architecturally striking feature. Within months, every surface was covered in graffiti, every window smashed. The 19-building complex became one of the clearest examples of how publicizing abandoned locations on the internet accelerates their destruction. By 2013, the state concluded demolition was the only option. Today, there is nothing there. The land is empty. The story is the only thing that survived. Number 8. St. Elizabeth's Hospital, where assassins and poets go to disappear. The patient list reads like a thriller novel. Richard Lawrence, who tried to assassinate Andrew Jackson, John Hinckley Jr., who shot Ronald Reagan, and poet Ezra Pound, who spent 12 years there after being declared unfit for trial on treason charges for his fascist radio broadcasts during World War II. The superintendent was reportedly so fascinated by Pound that he chose to treat him as insane rather than allow him to be prosecuted. St. Elizabeth's opened in 1855 as the government hospital for the insane, the first federally operated psychiatric hospital in America, championed by reformer Dorothea Dix. At its peak in the 1950s, it held over 8,000 patients on 176 acres overlooking the Anacostia River. The name, deliberately spelled without an apostrophe, came from Civil War soldiers who used the land tract's original name to hide their whereabouts from family. After deinstitutionalization emptied the wards, the West Campus became the largest piece of unused federal land in D.C. In 2007, the Department of Homeland Security announced a $4.1 billion plan to turn it into their headquarters. In late 2025, DH declared 17 historic buildings a risk to life and property and moved to demolish them. A Civil War-era cemetery with thousands of graves still sits on the grounds. The nation's first asylum for the mentally ill is being rebuilt as a fortress for national security. That is the kind of irony that does not need commentary. Number 7. Danvers State Hospital, the castle that became condos. The land comes with a curse, or at least the appearance of one. Danvers State Hospital was built in 1874 on Hathorne Hill in Massachusetts, land once owned by John Hathorne, the Salem witch trial judge who sent 20 people to their deaths. The Gothic asylum cost $1.5 million and stretched 1,100 feet across the hilltop. H.P. Lovecraft reportedly used it as inspiration for his fictional Arkham Sanitarium. It was designed for 500 patients. By the 1940s, it held over 2,400. Reports of shock therapies, lobotomies, and straitjackets followed. The hospital closed in 1992 and sat abandoned for over a decade, despite being on the National Register of Historic Places since 1984. In 2005, Avalon Bay Communities bought the property. Preservationists sued. They lost. Most of the complex was demolished in 2006. Then, on April 7, 2007, a fire of undetermined origin engulfed the new construction. The blaze was visible from Boston, 17 miles away. The site is now an apartment complex with a pool and a gym. A small plaque on the grounds. The patient cemetery is still there. A castle that inspired Lovecraft, built on land cursed by the witch trials, demolished for condominiums, and then burned. Some ground does not want to be developed. If you are finding this interesting, give the video a thumbs up. And if you have ever driven past a boarded up hospital or found yourself down a strange road in a part of the country you did not expect, tell us about it in the comments. We read every single one, and those tips help us find new places to investigate. We are only halfway through the list, and the stories from here get heavier. Number 6. Glendale Hospital, the Surgeon General's masterpiece, rotting 15 miles from the capital. The U.S. Surgeon General once called Glendale the most up-to-date and complete institution of its kind in the country. Built in 1934 as a tuberculosis sanatorium for Washington, D.C.'s population, the campus spread across 216 acres with 23 Georgian Revival brick buildings designed by Nathan C. Wyeth, the same architect behind the Key Bridge and the original Oval Office. There were two main hospital buildings. Building A for adults, 293 beds, opened in 1937. Building B for children, 257 beds, opened in 1934. Underground tunnels connected them. Patients tended rooftop gardens. Beds were pushed outside onto terraces for sunlight therapy. When antibiotics conquered TB, the facility pivoted to treating chronic illness. Then, a 1976 fire inspection uncovered asbestos contamination, lead paint, and safety violations that would cost $23 million to fix. The hospital closed in 1982. Plans for a spa, a retirement community, and various developments all failed. Today, police guard the campus around the clock, watching for trespassers. Glendale Road bisects the property, so you can actually drive between the crumbling buildings on a regular two-lane road. The most complete surviving example of White's institutional work is rotting behind police lines while suburban subdivisions press in on all sides. That is as close to a metaphor for how America treats its own history as you are likely to find. Number 5. Pennhurst State School and Hospital. The shame of Pennsylvania. A doctor at Pennhurst once asked a colleague which injection would cause a patient the most pain without permanently injuring him. Then he administered it as punishment. That detail was not leaked. It was not whispered by a whistleblower. It was described openly, on camera, during a 1968 NBC television expose by correspondent Bill Baldini that labeled the institution the shame of Pennsylvania. Pennhurst opened in 1908 as the Eastern Pennsylvania State Institution for the Feeble-Minded and Epileptic. The 1,400-acre campus contained over 30 buildings, its own power plant, farm, morgue, barbershop, firehouse, and railway station. It was designed for 500 residents. By 1912, it was already overcrowded. In 1983, 9 employees were indicted on charges including assaulting patients and arranging for patients to fight each other. The landmark civil rights case Halderman v. Pennhurst, filed in 1974, reached the U.S. Supreme Court and proved that institutionalized people had a constitutional right to community-based care. The hospital closed in 1987 after 79 years. It is now an international site of conscience, a worldwide network dedicated to remembering struggles for justice. A museum on the grounds offers historical tours. A controversial seasonal haunted attraction also operates on the lower campus. A place that represented America's worst instincts toward the disabled ultimately produced one of the country's most important civil rights precedents. That is the only kind of redemption a place like Pennhurst gets. Number 4. Renwick Smallpox Hospital. America's only landmarked ruin. New York City has exactly one building that is officially landmarked as a ruin. Not restored. Not preserved. Landmarked as a ruin in its current state of collapse. It sits on the southern tip of Roosevelt Island in the East River, designed in 1854 by James Renwick Jr., the same architect who built St. Patrick's Cathedral. When it opened in 1856, it was the first major hospital in America dedicated to treating smallpox, handling about 7,000 patients a year with a mortality rate approaching 25%. The center building is made entirely from the island's own schist rock, quarried, cut, and laid by prisoners from the island's penitentiary. The hospital closed in 1875 and became a nursing school, which itself was abandoned in the 1950s. In 1972, the ruins were added to the National Register of Historic Places. In 2007, a section of the north wing collapsed. Today, the Gothic walls are illuminated by floodlights every night. Through the empty pointed arch windows, you can see the Manhattan skyline glittering on the other side of the water. A building carved from the ground it stands on by inmates for the sick and dying, now lit up like a monument every night for a city that mostly does not know it is there. Number 3. Ellis Island Immigrant Hospital. The 22-building heartbreak machine. Everyone knows Ellis Island. 12 million immigrants, the Great Hall, the Statue of Liberty across the water. Almost nobody knows about the 22-building hospital complex on the island's south side. It opened in 1902. Doctors marked arriving immigrants with chalk codes on their clothing: E for eyes, H for heart, P for pregnant, X for suspected mental defects. Those marked were sent to the south side. Between 1892 and 1951, approximately 276,000 patients were admitted. 399 babies were born there. 4,963 people died. 9 out of 10 were treated successfully and allowed to enter the country. No major epidemic was ever traced to an immigrant who passed through the hospital. Then, in 1954, the Coast Guard, the island's last tenant, walked out. They did not close the doors. They did not close the windows. They left behind everything: muffin tins, soup tureens, clothing trunks. For 60 years, the 22 buildings sat open to the elements. Since 2014, the nonprofit Save Ellis Island has offered hard hat tours. French artist Junior installed large-scale photographs of immigrants in the hospital rooms, some in the same rooms where those patients were treated. The buildings remain in a state of arrested decay, not restored, not demolished. Hope and heartbreak in adjacent rooms, exactly as it always was. Number 2. Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum. The largest hand-cut stone building in North America. Patients were admitted to the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum in Weston, West Virginia, for the following reasons: asthma, laziness, egotism, novel reading, disappointed love, and greediness. Women could be committed for change of life, menstrual problems, or not listening to their husbands. Construction began in 1858 using prison labor and hand-cut blue sandstone. It is the largest hand-cut stone masonry building in North America, nearly a quarter-mile long with 2.5 miles of hallways. It was designed according to Thomas Kirkbride's theory of moral treatment. Each of its 250 patients was to have their own room, natural light, fresh air, and therapeutic. Occupation. By the 1950s, it held 2,400, 10 times capacity. In the early 1950s, Dr. Walter Freeman led the West Virginia lobotomy project at the asylum to reduce overcrowding. A nurse went missing and was later found dead at the bottom of a set of unused stairs. The hospital's imposing 200-foot clock tower has clocks on only 3 of its 4 sides. Despite over 160 years of scholarship, no one has ever explained why the 4th side was left blank. The asylum closed in 1994 and was auctioned in 2007. An asbestos demolition contractor named Joe Jordan bought it for $1.5 million. He did not demolish it, he saved it. Today, you can tour most of the building, which remains largely in its abandoned state. The first floor has been partially restored as a museum with patient artwork and medical restraints. A building designed to cure 250 people through architecture and compassion held 10 times that number and administered lobotomies. The clocks still have a blank face. That feels about right. Number 1. Riverside Hospital, North Brother Island, the island where Typhoid Mary died and 1,000 people burned. 20 acres of dense forest, trees growing through the windows of a tuberculosis pavilion. Vines wrapping around a building that last treated a patient over 60 years ago. The ferry dock has crumbled into the East River. No path in, no lights, no sound except bird calls from one of the largest black-crowned night heron colonies in the region and the low churn of the current. Somewhere beneath the vegetation is the approximate location of a small waterfront cottage. That cottage belonged to Mary Mallon. You know her as Typhoid Mary. North Brother Island sits in the East River between the Bronx and Rikers Island. New York City bought it in 1885 and built Riverside Hospital, a quarantine facility for patients with typhus, tuberculosis, yellow fever, and smallpox. In 1904, a church picnic steamship called the P.S. General Slocum caught fire within sight of the island. 1,021 people died. Hospital staff and patients rushed to the shore and waded into the water to pull out survivors. It was the worst loss of life in New York City history until September 11th. 3 years later, a cook named Mary Mallon was brought to the island. She was the first documented asymptomatic carrier of typhoid fever in the United States. She had infected at least 22 people. She did not believe she was sick. She was released in 1910 with orders to never cook again. She went back to cooking, infected at least 25 more people, and was returned to the island in 1915. She spent the next 23 years there. She died on November 11, 1938, still insisting she was innocent, on an island she could never leave, within sight of a city she could never rejoin. After the quarantine era, the island briefly housed WE veterans, then became a drug rehabilitation center for teenagers. Staff corruption shut it down for good in 1963. Since then, the forest has been swallowing everything. All 25 buildings still stand in various states of extreme dilapidation. The island is a designated forever wild preserve. Public access is prohibited. Permits are issued only for compelling academic and scientific purposes, and a city parks employee must escort every visitor. There is no dock. Most buildings have no functional roof. Poison ivy is everywhere. Less than a mile away, 8 million people live their lives in the loudest city on earth, and most of them have no idea this place exists. An entire abandoned hospital island, hidden in plain sight, where the sick were exiled, the dead washed ashore, and one woman spent 2 decades insisting she was not what everyone said she was. The city grew around it. The forest grew over it. Nobody came back. Across the country, from Appalachian hilltops to islands in the East River, these hospitals carried the weight of epidemics, mental illness, and institutional failure. And then, they were left behind. For me, it is North Brother Island, an entire abandoned world hidden inside the most crowded city in America. Which of these surprised you the most? And is there an abandoned hospital near you that should have made the list? If this kind of forgotten American history is what you are here for, subscribe. We have more coming.